I'm Chris Evans, Extension Forester with the University of Illinois, and Paul had asked me to do a quick 30-minute or so little session on recognizing herbicide damage in trees. I hope to finish fairly quick, and that way we'll have enough time for questions if you guys have any. But I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. And if you have questions during the presentation, just throw them in the chat box. I'll watch it as well, and then we can just unmute and talk at the end. Alrighty, so the first thing, basically recognizing herbicide damage, to me, when you're looking at trees, it's not as simple as it sounds. There's really no diagnostic field characteristic that you'll find when looking at the trees that's unique to herbicide damage. Every characteristic or every symptom of herbicide damage is shared by some other causes. So really what we're limited to is identifying symptoms that are consistent with herbicide damage. So we can't say it's for sure herbicide damage. We can just say, to the best of our knowledge, these symptoms are consistent with herbicide damage, and then we take steps to rule out any other causes. That just gives us more and more confidence that what we're looking at is actually herbicide damage. So if we rule out some of these other lookalike causes, that's going to help. The big thing when you're looking at herbicide damage is paying attention to the patterns. One of the big ones is are multiple species impacted, particularly if they are unrelated or distantly related. Most of our insects and pathogens do not cross those taxonomic lines very widely. So if you have multiple species that are sharing the same symptoms, that are close to each other, that are unrelated, that's a good indication that it's some type of abiotic impact. It could be herbicide, it could be something else, but that's a really good indication that it's not a biotic issue. The other thing that I look at is, are there one age of leaves that are impacted, in the sense that you have a bunch of leaves that are showing these symptoms, and then you have a flush of otherwise healthy looking leaves after that. That's a good one. And then just a pattern of where you're seeing these symptoms. Is it the windward side of a tree? Is it the side that's close to a field? Is there something else that in the pattern of exposure, the pattern of this damage you're seeing, lends itself towards the likelihood of it being herbicide? And of course, there's a bunch of different ways herbicide can, non-target species or trees can be exposed to herbicide. You know, a big one is basically a direct application via overspray. Some herbicides move through root grafts. There's soil, water, overland movement, and then particle drift, and of course, vapor drift. So just for example, and I know this is on trees, but it's useful. If we have a picture here, and our target is that now dead bush honeysuckle, we spray that, but then over here is just direct overspray. So that's a non-target. We didn't mean to hit that species. It happens to be stilt grass, so we don't really care. But that's kind of a directed overspray. So that's one way. Another might be overland movement or water movement. This is some research that we did looking at the control of stilt grass, where we had our target area and our plots that we were researching. But if you can see, the dead zones there kind of extended out from it. And this was actually movement of herbicide via water. And so overland flow of water moved the herbicide into non-targets as well. So there's just a couple different ways that herbicide move, and it can impact and expose non-targets. But really, you know, what we're talking about, and I think the biggest push right now is recognizing particle drift and vapor drift from agricultural herbicides. So that's really what I'm going to focus on more than these other exposure methods. And this is just a short list here of some of the symptoms that come along with herbicide damage or herbicide exposure that you'll see in trees. A big one is deformed leaves. So the leaves will cup, either they'll cup up or cup down. Oftentimes the edges of the leaves will curl. Sometimes the leaves will twist or pucker and almost look like, you know, seersucker. or they'll get elongated growth. The foliage can also be discolored. Red, purple is a common coloration, yellow. You can see a lot of necrosis or just death of the leaf tissue. And then sometimes it almost looks like the onset of early fall color. You can have deformed stems, twisted stems, very elongated stems, or the formation of witch's brooms, which of course is just clusters of a bunch of small stems together. And then you can get just total defoliation or even dieback due to herbicide damage. But the problem comes is, again, these are not unique to just herbicide damage. So if you're looking at frost damage, which we had a little bit this year with some of our late season frost, they will do some of these symptoms as well. If you look at the tree's response to abiotic stress, that could be drought, it could be soil compaction, a lot of other things. A lot of these characteristics we can see when there's some abiotic stress that are impacting these trees. Insect feeding looks a lot like many of these symptoms, particularly that cupping and twisting, curling of the leaves, as well as necrosis. Pathogens, diseases will also do a lot of these characteristics, these symptoms. And then even nutrient deficiencies that we'll find some of the trees respond to that through discolored foliage, curling of the leaves, smaller leaves, and defoliation. So really this slide was just to show that again, it's not that simple. When you see the symptoms, you have to kind of do a little research, ask some questions, look around to see if you can rule out any of these other causes of those symptoms. There's a bunch of herbicides that will damage trees out there. Growth regulators, photosynthetic inhibitors, enzyme inhibitors, contact herbicides, soil sterilants, a lot of different ones out there that will and do commonly damage trees. Again, since we're really talking about this off-site movement drift of agricultural herbicides, those are the two ones that seem to do that the most, that we seem to have in Illinois. You know, the ester formulation of 2,4-D and then dicamba. Those two herbicides seem to be the ones that are implicated in a lot of this kind of widespread damage of trees that we're seeing. So just a few pictures here looking at the symptomology. You know, thinning canopy can be from a lot of different reasons, but that is a good indication that something's going on with this tree, and it could be herbicide damage. It could be thinning just from defoliation, or it could be just the leaf area has decreased due to severe cupping or rolling, either one. But just seeing that thinning canopy is a good sign the tree's under stress, and it could be herbicide exposure. Here's some slight cupping and slight twisting on this chinkapin oak, and you see it's cupping upwards a little bit there. And this is fairly common kind of characteristic you'll see with herbicide exposure. And this is a northern red oak here that has twisting and elongating of the ends of the leaves. You can see the ends of the leaves are deformed. They're a little longer than normal, and they're kind of twisted and misshapen. And this tree here still has enough leaf area that it's going to photosynthesize. It seems to be doing okay, but it certainly is not normal looking foliage. And this is more of a severe look at with northern red oak. This is very severe twisting and rolling, and you can see those leaves are just rolled up tight. We see this, there are some insects that can do this, leaf rollers and different things that'll really twist and roll these leaves as well. So when I'm looking at this and I see something like this, I'll definitely take the leaves and unroll them and look at the bottom side of those leaves to see if you'll see any silk or any active insects in there. That's a real good way to look at that. Or if there's anything like jumping oak gall or some other feature on there that might be causing that those leaves to roll. But herbicide exposure certainly can result in severe twisting and rolling like we see in this picture. Here's some more severe down-facing cupping. The last one, that chinkapin, it was kind of cupping upwards. This one's cupping downwards and kind of starting to roll as well. Some people say that the herbicides will one herbicide will tend to cause the trees to cup up and one will cause them to cup down. I do not see that. I think that's inconsistent. I'm not sure what causes some trees to cup up and some to cup down, but I don't think it's herbicide specific necessarily. Just some more severe cupping on this black oak here. And then just a comparison again, healthy foliage on the left, impacted foliage on the right. And that's always a good idea to kind of look at what does the healthy trees in the area, or trees that don't seem to be showing the symptomology, what do they look like and how far diverging from normal are the symptoms. And that's always a good way to evaluate it and just kind of see what's going on. Some more cupping, rolling, this time in white oak. I'm focusing on the oaks first here. You can see the ends of the branches are really cupped tightly or starting to roll in. And if this gets severe enough, you'll get necrosis or tissue death on them as well, like you see here. And this is a good picture in the sense that it does show that kind of two age of leaves, like I mentioned, where we have some of the older foliage out there that's impacted, they're tightly rolled, they're cupping, they're starting to die back. But then we have this flush of additional growth on the branches as well that otherwise appear completely healthy. And that is something that you will see with herbicide exposure quite a bit, is where oftentimes it exposes that it's most vulnerable. Those leaves are most vulnerable as they're just starting to emerge, when they're very young, just coming out of the bud stage. And the exposure will impact them and damage those leaves. But the other leaves are still kind of tight in their buds, are not formed yet. So later in the season, you'll get that flush of growth that's really largely unaffected by the herbicide. And so I do see that pretty common when I'm looking at suspect herbicide exposure, is this kind of two ranks of healthy leaves and impacted leaves on the same tree. And then again, just to highlight, there's a lot of other causes, and pay attention to them. That is potential herbicide exposure on the right, but I see that same look to leaves all the time with something like jumping oak gall. And so the picture on the left is not a great picture of it, but if you're familiar with jumping oak gall, they get on these leaves and cause them to cup and fold in and curl severely at times as well. So I like to pull those leaves off, again, fold them out, look at there, and do you see the little pimples that would be consistent with jumping oak gall, or is that absent? Just another way of trying to rule out a common cause of leaf curling. Sometimes they're slight. So this is some slight cupping or slight folding of flowering dogwood. This could be herbicide damage. We see this same thing with drought stress on dogwood especially. So look around, ask questions. Is the area that you're looking at, if you see this, is it under drought stress? Are there other plants that are showing some drought stress symptoms? Is it not rained for a while? Is the ground really dry? Try to rule out drought. Kind of some more extreme symptoms here on flowering dogwood. Drooping, we get that early fall coloration, necrosis of leaves. Again, this could be herbicide exposure. Those same symptoms could be drought. It even could be dogwood anthracnose potentially. So there's other potential causes, but this is something that when you have more extreme herbicide exposure, you'll start to see some of these symptoms. Hickory, this is one that's cupping upward like this. Hickories do seem to be fairly susceptible to herbicide exposure. And then just necrosis, dieback of the leaves like this is another kind of more of extreme example. And then curling, cupping, strapping, or puckering. You can see these are, especially the edges are starting to do that for this red bud. Of course, red buds, if you know the healthy leaves of red buds, they should be entire along the edge, no serrations, no waves or anything. So if you start to see that puckering or strapping along the edge, the discoloration, good signs, good indications that something's wrong with that tree for sure. And this was an interesting story here, and this goes back a couple years. We had a landowner call us and had some trees that were really starting to brown up in the middle of summer. Wanted us to come take a look at it. We looked at this tree, and here's this oak, and you can see there's a lot of leaf necrosis of the leaf tissue in between the veins. And the first thing that came to mind for me was this is potentially oak wilt. It really fit the symptoms, the symptomology, the look of oak wilt, where we had red oaks that were really being impacted severely, all in a cluster. At the edge of that cluster, we had white oaks that had some symptomology, but it wasn't as severe. We had the tissue dye back in the leaves with the green veins. We really thought we had oak wilt on this one. We took samples, sent it in for verification. They came back negative. We did that again and took more samples and sent it in for verification. They came back negative. And so we really started scratching our head and trying to figure out what happened with these trees. And we kind of cast a wider net and started looking wider around the area. And we found some hickories that were close by that also had the very same symptomology. And that was a good clue to us that unrelated species, we had oaks and hickories that both had the same symptomology. Then we went away from this idea of it being a pathogen and thought it's got to be some kind of abiotic stressor. We asked the landowner all the standard questions you ask in that situation. Has there been any soil work in that area? Has there been heavy equipment in there? Is this area under some drought stress? Kind of went through any of the work that might be happening. You put a new sewer line in or anything? And he said no to everything, and just could not figure it out, and really left scratching our heads. And then the guy called me later that day and asked, do you think herbicide might be doing that? And my answer was, well, it depends on the herbicide and what you did. And so he was a guy that hated weeds. And so he had this area by his house that he battled weeds in. And so he knew that the power companies spray Hyvar or Bromacil along their power poles to keep the weeds down. And so he thought, well, I'll do that in my parking area here. So he sprayed this soil applied herbicide that has a long residual at incredibly high rates because he wanted to get rid of all the weeds. And we thought, well, yeah, that'll do it. And he ended up actually way over label, ended up killing 6 or 7 of his trees, big oaks and hickories, just from not reading the label, not putting the herbicide in the right place. And so we would have never thought about herbicide exposure on these trees without asking those questions and working with the landowner to kind of figure out what was up. That particular herbicide damage looked incredibly similar to the symptomology for oak wilt. So it was really it was a difficult case to diagnose, but we finally got there after several weeks of scratching our heads. Alrighty, so herbicide sensitive trees, these are the ones that tend to be, from what I've seen and what other people see, a little more sensitive to this herbicide drift. Tulip poplars are one that's very sensitive. Oaks seem to be, hackberries as well. I'm not saying that these are the only ones, but those are the ones I think that we most often see the damage with herbicide on. And then I'll end up here just a quick little summary of some of these other causes that may look like herbicide damage. Again, like we mentioned, insects and pathogens, they rarely impact a wide variety of unrelated species. Often insects and pathogens focus on a genus or a family. So if you find unrelated species that show symptomology, the chances are that it's not an insect or a pathogen. The one of the major exceptions to that, and that's important this year, is this little guy, right? We have the periodical cicadas that are expected to come out in portions of Illinois this year. I think East Central Illinois. And they flag trees, right? As they lay their eggs, they'll put the slit in the small branches to lay their eggs in the tree. that causes flagging. And so if you see this this year and this summer, particularly in East Central Illinois, good chances are you're looking at periodical cicada damage. We had this in Southern Illinois in 2015, and many trees had this flagging that looked like this with the dieback of small diameter branches. I got a lot of calls that year, people not knowing what was wrong. I thought their trees were dying. If you get up to the trees, you can see those oviposition sites where the cicadas made the slit to lay their eggs, and you'll get this flagging. Expect that this year for sure. I'd imagine that, especially if you're in that East Central Illinois area, you're going to get a lot of questions about this. Sometimes that flagging can be very severe. Other ones, we periodically have outbreaks of oak skeletonizers, which is a little moth, and the caterpillar feeds on the leaves, and so you'll get dieback browning of whole trees at times like this. This happened in 2016, I believe, here in Southern Illinois. It looks scarier than it is when you see these full trees browning up in the middle of summer. If you get in there and inspect them, you'll see obvious signs of feeding damage, whether it's skeletonized tissues or holes in the leaves. Really good indications that that's insect feeding and not herbicide damage. Another one, particularly in wet years, that looks a lot like herbicide damage would be anthracnose. This happens to be sycamore anthracnose, but in wet years, we'll get it in oak and a lot of other species as well. And anthracnose causes that dieback, the curling, the cupping of leaves as well. This would be mostly the case kind of early summer when you have very wet springs is when you're most likely to find anthracnose. If you get in there and look, especially with sycamores, the anthracnose, you'll have these scar points on the smaller branches that also anthracnose will get in, and that's a good indication that you're looking at anthracnose. Witch's brooms. Witch's brooms are caused by a bunch of things, including herbicide exposure. You see a witch's brooms all the time on hackberry. They're usually the cause. Mites and fungus will cause those on hackberries. There's other trees where it'll be phytoplasmas or some other organism that'll cause witch's brooms. So just because you see that doesn't necessarily mean that it's herbicide damage. It could be some of these other causes. I would say if you do see it, look at that tree or do some research on that tree and see if it's susceptible to witch's brooms from mites or something. So if it's hackberries, and then look for that symptom across multiple species is a good indication that it's not going to be an organismal cause, a biotic cause. And then just abiotic conditions, symptoms, they can impact multiple species, just like herbicide damage. Phenology can create some specificity in the sense that it's just what trees are kind of susceptible at that time. And you just try to pattern abiotic conditions by location or history. We found a little bit of frost damage. I found this the other day on some buckeyes where we had some of the leaves wilting down from a late freeze we had here. If it's really cold, you can have some severe dieback due to frost damage on these. So that's one. Again, just knowing the history of the site, knowing the area. Have you recently had some late freezes? And then you get some weird things. And so this was from Department of Ag, where you had these lines going up browning on these little trees. They couldn't figure out what it was. Eventually they found out it was exhaust damage from a piece of equipment that was digging up and working the soil. The exhaust was pointed right at these trees, and as it slowly moved around working the soil, it just created a dead zone. So that's an unusual pattern that could be herbicide exposure. Something like that could happen. But in this case, it was a weird exhaust exposure. And then lastly, nutrient deficiencies, chlorosis. That's something that can look a lot like herbicide exposure. In this case, know your species, know which ones are subject to nutrient deficiencies. So pin oak's a great example, that if you see pin oaks growing in areas that have high pHs, you're almost guaranteed to have chlorosis in them. Again, with this one, look for multiple species kind of showing these same symptoms are a good indication that it's herbicide damage and not nutrient deficiency or something like that. So just in summary, I know I went quick, but I wanted to leave a few minutes here for questions. You cannot definitively diagnose herbicide damage just from field observations. It really takes a tissue analyses to find it. What we can do is record those observations of symptoms that are consistent with herbicide exposure, and then investigate other possibilities and rule them out if you can. And by doing that, you're increasing your confidence that what you're looking at is herbicide exposure. Do that by asking questions. Where's the proximity of the damage close to fields? Have there been recent applications in the area? How long has the symptomology been on these trees? How big is the impacted area? Is there any recent work in the area? Any recent equipment? Is it a droughty situation, et cetera? Ask these questions, look around, try to find other causes, and by ruling them out, again, you're building up your confidence that what you're looking at actually is herbicide damage. Look for those patterns, especially multiple species being impacted, flushes of healthy growth on the leaves kind of following the damaged leaves. To me, that's some of the best things to look for. And then look for that symptomology of cupping, curling, twisting of the leaves. That seems to be the most common things that we look for when we're investigating, that we see commonly looking at herbicide damage.